Thank you. So once again, thank you all for inviting me and thank you for coming. This is the second in a series of 11 sermons. I've been asked to do one each, the first Sunday of each month. Last Sunday was kind of an overview, and this Sunday is going to focus on a very small part of a big task. So if you think that this sermon leaves out some parts of what you think we ought to be about, that's true, but I'm focusing on a very narrow area this morning. I have 2 degrees, a Bachelor of Science and a Bachelor of Divinity. And part of my life's work has been getting those 2 degrees to talk to each other. And I believe that's a very important task in the 21st century. We cannot separate those 2 ways of looking at life. And last month, I set out the big theme of what can a liberal religious congregation do to make a significant contribution to the 21st century. Today, I want to focus on one aspect of that work, and that has to do with providing for our time a story and a way of living that is in harmony with the way the universe really is as we really understand it really today. There is a tendency to say, well, science doesn't say what the Bible says in the first 3 verses, so ignore science. That's an unhelpful approach. Thus, the rest of this sermon. In 1980, I lived in Wyden, West Virginia. It's a coal mining town. There were about 1,000 people lived there. Half were under the age of 17. And part of my job was to motivate the kids to do something worthwhile and find work for young growing up kids in West Virginia. One of the things that I had access to was a movie projector, and one of the ways you could get the kids' attention was have movie night. So we had movie night. And I had access to the library at the West Virginia Library, and I got movies. And one movie I got, how I got it I don't know, was the history of Bell Labs when they made that telescope that was supposed to listen to radio waves. And somebody at Bell Labs had the idea that they could make this big megaphone kind of a thing, and they could listen to the stars, and they could collect radio waves or something from the stars, and then they were going to learn something from that. So they decided to calibrate their machine. They would point it at the blackest place they could get, and they would calibrate their machine to no noise. And then they would look at something bright, and then they would compare. But every black place they looked at, they kept getting this hum in the background. So they recalibrate their machine, took it all apart, rebuilt the thing, pointed it at another black spot. Finally, it dawned on them that what they were hearing was the background radiation from the primal flaring forth of the universe itself. And that everywhere you look in space, you will hear the very faint radiation from the very beginning. Wow, impressive. It's sort of like I have an electric stove, and when you boil the water, the thing turns red. And when you turn it off, it goes back to black. But it doesn't completely go back to stone cold. And if you just touch a black thing and assume it's cold, it may not be cold. Seeing those guys' research has rattled around in my mind for now, some 35 years. And I've been fascinated to try to understand what is the story that the universe has to tell. Not all the data, but the story. And one of the parts of the story is it's not all a bed of roses. It's not all daffodils and lilacs in the springtime. There are big, huge explosions. I mean, if you'd have been sitting around this part of the galaxy 5 billion years ago, betting on that nice star, it blew up. And in the blowing up of stars are forged all of the materials that eventually became SID. So, and you can say that about everybody else. So if you'd have been thinking, wow, I'm sure I'm enjoying this beautiful star in my sky, you'd have missed SID and Steve. And not to be partial to anybody. Another factor to kind of look at, people like Teilhard de Chardin, people like Ken Wilber, big thinkers, try to look at what's the long sweep of history. So we sang this song this morning, where did we come from? Where are we going? Well, I'm trying to ask the big question. Where did we come from, not just yesterday, last week, mama? And where are we going? Not tomorrow, and I'm interested in tomorrow and next month, but what about 17 generations down the road? And when you look at the long sweep, guys like Ken Wilber, Teilhard, and that school say that the universe is moving towards increased complexity consciousness. They say that every time the universe tries to get its act together and it can't figure out quite what to do, it gets organized at a more sophisticated level of organization. At a more sophisticated level of organization. In other words, when there's just atoms and electrons and all kinds of shit flying around every place, they can't quite decide what to do. Bang! An electron and a proton decide to go around each other. And if the electron goes around each other, it can stay with the proton. And light can shoot through them, and they hold on. And they made a little pair. And sometime, a couple of hydrogen atoms decided to hook up with an oxygen atom. Whoa, what a deal. And then a bunch of other oxygen and hydrogen decided, hey, we're going to hook up. How does that's the kind of pattern of the universe. And it changes things when you begin to look at the universe as moving towards increased complexity. I'm always fascinated by the weather people when they report on tropical depressions and they say it got organized. Huh? And what happens when it gets organized? Well, hot water's trying to go up and cold water's trying to come down. And if you got a lot of hot water going up and a lot of cold water coming down, if you can get that thing turning, you'll have a hurricane. And you'll also get water to the Piedmont, which is a good thing. So, we live in a 14 billion year old universe. It's not all a bed of roses. It's moving in a direction of complexity and consciousness. And there's three big themes. There's three big themes that the universe dances to all along. Communion, differentiation, and autopoiesis. Communion is like the hydrogen atoms coming together with the water. There is an urge in the universe to get together and build bonds. That's a deep-seated urge of the universe. There's also an urge in the universe to come apart, differentiation. And when the pressure gets too much, the star just says, forget this, and kabang. And there is autopoiesis, that is, every little part of the universe makes decisions about its future. One way or the other, every little part makes its own decisions. Elaine and I have been watching the birds outside of our window. The nuthatches and the bluebirds have been fighting over our bluebird house. Elaine built it as a bluebird house, but the nuthatches have the house. More about that next month. So now, we cannot ignore these realities that I just talked about, and I think this is fairly good science. It stands on fairly solid ground, and we are fools to say this stuff isn't real. Now, so what? We have, as a liberal religious community, people like you and I, we have a responsibility to figure out how to make this understandable to common people, to everybody, and to bring it into our own lives. Because if you want to succeed, go with the flow. And this is the flow of the universe. So, come on, guys. Let's get together. So, a couple of things. There's 4 things I want to say are practical implications. We live in an emerging universe. Let's just learn to say, I live in an emerging universe. I live in an emerging universe. How do you say that 1,000 different ways? I live in an emerging universe, and I'm a human being, and I'm going to contribute to the emerging of the universe. How am I going to do that? That's your problem and mine. We'll figure it out together. But I'm on the cusp, and I'm standing between yesterday and tomorrow. And when the universe stands between yesterday and tomorrow, what that means is everything that's in the now has to decide about the then, the future. That's how it works. Second, there is no right answer. The universe, there is no place that you can go that will have a statement about what the universe is supposed to look like tomorrow, 100 years from now, 1,000 years from now, or 2,000 years ago. The universe is waiting. It's waiting for Steve. What's Steve going to do? And you can imagine the whole universe is wondering, what's he going to do? What's he going to do? And it's true for Hazel and everybody else. The universe is waiting for your decision today about tomorrow, and what you decide today will influence tomorrow, positive or negative. And there is no place. You can read all the books here, and they will not guarantee you what's going to happen tomorrow. Now, they may help you figure it out. And I'm not debating wisdom and all that other stuff. And we can't go backwards. There is no way to go back to yesterday. Yesterday is gone. The key to tomorrow, because the universe is moving towards complexity, the key to tomorrow is more complex structures. Now, there's a lot of people who say today, well, I'm just going to do it by myself. Ho, me. And if you would just get out of my way, then I could be a better me. That's a false understanding of how the universe works. Never has worked that way, never will work that way. You and I have to figure out how to work together. Whether we agree with each other or not, that's a different thing. And that's true for you and everybody else. We have to figure out how to work together. And that means there's some corollaries to that, which I'll come to in just a second. And lastly, the practical implication is tomorrow depends on you and I. And for you and I to say, is a false way. The world doesn't need people to fall asleep. It needs people awake. And for me, for religious communities like this job of unlocking the future is much bigger than just doing a bunch of good stuff, putting in CF bulbs and recycling your plastic. It's a huge job, and this question of figuring out how to get the story told about the real universe that we really live in and the future that we're really moving into is very complicated. But there are some things we can do, and that's what I want to talk about now. Number one, we can learn to tell the universe's big story. If you don't like the little paragraph that I wrote, which I admit leaves out some details, write your own. And if you would like a template for writing your own story, you can go to my website and look at, or send me an email. But it's on there. It's called the Cosmology Worksheet. And but each of us ought to write our own, and then we ought to have a conversation. Let's see. And what difference does it make? It makes a huge difference. Because if you're living out of the story that some big old man created a universe and now you have to fit into it, I guarantee you, you will live your life differently than I live mine. I guarantee it. I'm not saying which is right or wrong, but it will be different. Second, once you understand yourself living in an emerging universe, the conversation changes from what is right to what is effective for the long-term future. Because in a fixed universe, you have to go find a book or an old man or an old woman, but traditionally an old man, to tell you the right answer. And somebody has it. And we'll fight it out. And the guy who wins the fight at the end had the right answer. That's not true. Each one of us have to look for what's effective for the long-term future of the planet. And not just for the long-term future of the people. I've often talked about my dog, and now I've added the nuthatch and the bluebird family. How do you ask yourself, what's the right thing to do for the nuthatch who wants to live in the house on my clothesline? We have to change what we're talking about together from what's good for my individual journey. What's good for Kevin? How do I help Kevin get to be a really good person? That's important. But more importantly, how do Kevin and I have a profound relationship with each other? And what's involved in the relationship? How do I build relationships with the group? And that changes the question, because every time I enter into a relationship with somebody else, that relationship takes on a life of its own, and there's a kind of an overhead. In social dynamics, when we talk about the government, we call it a tax. But in my family, in my relationship with this group, there's a certain overhead. If I want to be your friend, I have to do some things to maintain the friendly relationship. I have to go out for coffee with you. Even, I don't really want to go for coffee, but we have to have time to talk. I mean, you have to put some energy into the relationships. And one of the things that we need to start to look at is, what is the cost of relationship? And how do we affirm the cost of relationship instead of saying, oh, you're a burden on me? Well, yes, you are a burden on me, but the universe is a burden on me. But it wants me. And I have to put something into it. And we can then begin to look at, how do systems organize themselves? I'd be really interested to sit down with a weather guy and talk about, what can I learn from how Hurricane Fran got organized? And what would that help me learn about how to organize this group, or the city of Greensboro, or Guilford County, or whatever group that I'm a part of, my wife and I? How could we learn? I'm not trying to pick any one. What can we learn from how systems get organized? By looking at the universe and saying, how is the universe getting organized? It's pretty successful. Because, I mean, it's been at it for a while. And it got to here. I mean, we got Tim Leisman out of this universe, so can't be all bad. Lastly, in terms of implications, I believe this approach, starting this direction, going down this road, gives us some clues to recover what it means by the divine. How do we talk about divine action in the 21st century? Over the years, a lot of people within the human species have said there's something more going on than meets the eye. They've used language, they've used God language, they've used the divine, whatever. They've used a lot of different words. Some of those words and some of the quotes that have carried down through the years are probably not real helpful. But some of them may be. And so what's today? This is March, not April. In May, I'm going to deal with this question head on. But I just want to say right now that looking at the universe real hard does begin to give some clues to how to raise that question, which is a very important question for the 21st century. Now, very practically, there's some very practical 4 things. Sometime you'll learn that all of my charts have 4 big points, and each one has 4 little points. Pretty soon you'll get that idea, because they all look the same. That's how I push myself to think. So, 4 real practical, short-term challenges. Number 1, I want to challenge every one of you to write your history of the universe in a paragraph. What's your really big story? Start out in the beginning, or start out a long time ago. However you want to start. Before, long before, however you want to start. A couple of things happened, then a couple of more things happened, then a few more things happened, and here I am. Something like that. And then let's share them. And then let's make this available to people. And let's say, this is the story I live out of. In 1975, some women came to me and told me that the liturgy of my church was sexist. And I told them I didn't think it was, and then they showed me, and I said, oh, it is sexist. And I worked very hard to get gender-neutral language out of liturgy. Now, I'm very sensitive to the fact that our language is fixed universe oriented, and it's cosmologically biased. And I'm on a big campaign to say I live in an emerging universe. And I watch every little sentence, and I'm sure that some people think I'm crazy or some other word. This whole conversation on House Bill 2. This is a question, the fundamental question is, do you have to fit in? I mean, God made you a boy, you're a boy. Shut up and like it. Or God made you a human being and you have to decide what gender to be. You're in an emerging universe, make a decision, and then live with the consequences. And so I challenge you to make notes to yourself. Where do you see language bias that's cosmologically biased to a fixed universe that you have to fit into, as opposed to an emerging reality that you participate in shaping the future? Make note and then figure out how to say it differently. I learned to say, instead of all men are created equal, I learned to say all humans are created equal. Now I want to say all beings are created equal. And then I want to try to figure out what word to say includes rivers and rocks, because rivers have river rights. And I don't know whether that's a being or not. I'm still working on that one. Then find out how to affirm your relationship to groups, and look seriously at what it means to be a member of a group and to participate in that. And don't bitch about the fact that You have to do some things for the good of the group, not just for your good. And don't turn it all back to because it'll help me, because it won't help you. It will help the group, and that's an important dynamic. The universe is looking for how to get organized, and you can help. And lastly, be bold about this thing. This is a big task. This is the task of the 21st century. A friend of mine says what we need is an additional testament for the 21st century. We got the Old Testament, we got the New Testament. We need an additional testament for the 21st century that's bold, that people are committed to, that people stand up and say, I live in an emerging universe, and the whole thing is important, and I'm going to help shape it. And that's the task. That takes deep courage. It takes insight. You got to think about it. You got to work on it, and you got to look in yourself. But that's the task of the 21st century. I look forward to hearing your stories. This is obviously a conversation that I enjoy participating in, and you can call me day or night and say, hey, let's talk about this. This is the conversation of the 21st century, and if a group of people like you want to be relevant to the 21st century, I would suggest you learn how to get involved in this conversation. Thank you.